All right, we're getting ready to prepare the stream. Zoom connecting with YouTube. We are live. Hey, everybody, what's happening? It's Robert Phoenix here today, broadcasting to you live from South by Southwest, the belly of the beast, the mothership, Whole Foods, right in the heart of Austin. And I am joined today with my good friend, Emily Moyer, my MASH mate, and our good friend all the way from Greenville, South Carolina, the legendary Freeman Fly. Welcome, everybody, to our little soiree here at South by Southwest. How are you?
Doing great.
Doing
go
well.
ahead, Freeman.
We both wait and then go. Yeah, doing good. You know, it's a rainy day here, and you know, just sitting back waiting for spring to kick in full time.
I hear you. We were pretty warm, and all of a sudden we got this polar blast thing, this polar vortex thing descended upon us. We're about at 40 degrees now. So,
wow, yeah. It's been kind of a chilly winter here in Los Angeles. It's been like an extended chilly thing. It's finally into the 70s this week, and it's going to get to 80 next week. So, which feels good to me. I like it to be between 70 and 80 all the time. I'm like, I want spring and summer all the time. One day of winter, and only if I can stay home in bed, and that's it.
Well, theoretically, you're in the right place, right? I mean, that's your weather pattern, or at least it was 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so, we had 77 degrees in February, and then it dropped to 29. It was the record year, 120 years. They had to go back to find when it was that warm in February here.
Wow.
Well, and we didn't have a single day that hit 70 in February in Los Angeles.
Right.
So look, everything's all back ass words. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. So first of all, again, thanks for the two of you to be on today's FARcast. And the genesis of this really started with a podcast or stream that Emily and I did about a week and a half ago. We got into Joe Rogan, which I'm sure we're going to touch on today, and Theogens, Austin. Austin is kind of an incubator for the new culture. I talked about that on my show earlier this week. And then Emily thought, well, who better to bring in than Freeman, who has some real deep knowledge about some of the esoteric and occult aspects of Austin, which I think a lot of people would find quite interesting. So we're going to get into that today. And before we do, though, I want to do a little bit of a heat check. We had a big event happen last night in New Zealand, where apparently there was a mass shooting in a mosque. And it wasn't just any mass shooting. There was apparently a live stream. And Freeman, just before we went on the air, you were telling me that this guy was referencing PewDiePie. And why don't we just dive right into this and try to put some threads together here?
Yeah, interesting that he threw in PewDiePie, being that PewDiePie was bought by Disney. And of course, everyone that's bought by Disney, let's just go back. Billy Ray Cyrus said he sold his daughter to Satan. George Lucas said he sold his children to white slavers. And, you know, now, you know, and a while back, PewDiePie had been bought by Disney and immediately was fired for anti-Semitic remarks. He had a couple of Indians, I believe, put up a sign that said, "Kill all Jews." And so, you know, obviously Disney was going to fire him at that point. But why was Disney buying PewDiePie? And then now, okay, so we look at the scenario. We're using 8chan. You know, this was his manifesto and his place to go for alt-right everything, 8chan, right, where you get Q knowledge and all of that. He referenced Trump, right, and said, well, I don't really like Trump's policies or anything, but he's a good representation of the white man. And then as he went in with a live action shooting, it was like a first player game. You know, so now we've got that influence in there while it's live streaming on Facebook. Right. So all these social engineering aspects. And then as he gets ready to open fire, he says, subscribe to PewDiePie. And of course, PewDiePie being Disney, being propaganda, all of these things just really start to stand out.
Right.
So
go ahead.
Well, there was just a bunch of interesting stuff in what you said there. Of course, so I love the fact that Disney is firing people for anti-Semitic remarks when Disney was born out of someone who was or certainly enhanced by someone who was a Nazi propagandist.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't make it.
So we've come full circle, like the head is eating the tail, kind of, right? So we've come full circle there, and then there was something else you said. What was it? Hold on a second. There was something interesting else in there. I just completely lost my train of thought. But that is kind of fascinating. The PewDiePie thing. I'm probably the only person in the world who doesn't really know or understand who or what PewDiePie is. So I'll refrain from remarking on that. But that is interesting. I also found it interesting that we're in Christchurch, New Zealand, right? And we have a shooting at the mosque. Oh, I know what I was going to say. You were talking about the live action shooterness of it, right? Like a game. Remember with the Parkland shooter, the kid's dad was the owner of that company or worked for that company that created simulations of things, right? So here we are, like in a further enhanced version of that this one's actually live streaming the live action play simulation, right?
Yeah.
That's what we have here.
Yeah. Well, what's also very interesting is right at the same time, there was a ruling that the parents of Sandy Hook can sue Remington. Okay. So this just came through like within the last 48 hours.
Yeah. Well, consider the serious, the gun laws in New Zealand. I mean, if we're talking about having gun laws in America, well, they have some severe gun laws in New Zealand. It's, it's very difficult, very, very difficult to get a gun. So where do guns laws come in with mass shootings?
Yeah. They really don't stop them, do they?
No.
Isn't it that all the mass shootings, the people had passed background checks, right? So like,
That's
is
true.
the point just to keep loading on meaningless, legislation and whatever? Or is the point to say, well, see, we have to just completely and totally ban guns because background checks don't work either?
That's where it's headed. That's what I think. And Emily and I were talking about this before we got on the air today. And now we're living in this global matrix where an event, whether it's in New Zealand or Australia or South Africa, seems to have a ripple effect, across these multimedia platforms. And it doesn't really matter now where the laws, theoretically are enacted or at the very least, abided by. And I think this is part of this new kind of plan, this new model, where it's a global choice or top-down global decision-making process, which I think we're going to get into a little bit more today.
Which is exactly what the shooter said as well, was that he wanted to incite more violence. He wanted to put a bigger divide in America and cause a ripple effect. He's this was intentional. He mentioned certain things, Candace Owen, Donald Trump, PewDiePie, all of these things in the intention to incite civil war in America and further violence around the globe. So, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting that it took place in New Zealand because maybe they couldn't get a false flag together fast enough in the United States at this level to make it happen. One little tidbit and bit of information that you both might find interesting is that John Podesta had just been in New Zealand prior to this. So put that on your radar.
Yeah. And James Holmes of the Aurora shooting worked for DARPA, and his dad too, right? Always these ties and always something that conspiracy theorists can cling on. And then, of course, this can be live cast through Facebook, but if you say crisis actor and Sandy Hook in the same sentence, you're banned from YouTube.
That's right.
I had to delete all those videos from my YouTube channel.
Did they tell you to?
No, I got 2 strikes. I had 1 left. 14 years on YouTube, and I'm one of the original YouTubers, and it was going to be gone. So I was like, I'll just delete whatever I think they are after, because it was obvious they came after anyone that promoted Jim Fetzer first.
Right.
And then they went after, which was all Sandy Hook and that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the modern equivalent of book burning, and that's really Fahrenheit 451.
Look what's happening to Michael Jackson.
Right.
I mean, if we want to tie another one in there, I can't find a lick of proof that Michael Jackson is guilty of any child abuse. Everyone that has said anything, I haven't seen Leaving Neverland. But at the same time, now they've erased him from Simpsons. You can't get the Simpsons episode with Michael Jackson on DVD, stream, or any way, shape, or form. And they're not playing his music anymore. And his daughter, Paris, is saying, you know, you guys are taking this way too serious. It's an interesting thing. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's the whole thing right now is we're global. And that's the big point that people are missing. And when they're looking at things, they're constantly looking internal to politics. And I've been screaming this since 9/11. Since 9/11 is an inside job. I was yelling at 9/11 truthers saying, look, it's a global job. It's not an inside job. You're destroying your own country from within. If we get to Alex and Joe Rogan's talk, he discovered the same thing. I've been telling him since the day I met him, look, dude, you're on the wrong side. You're making this problem because it's not, you're destroying your own country from within. I did an entire lecture on this called Because It's True. And I really think people should watch that because it lists just the social engineering that led up to the Honey Boo Boo moment where a shooter is mentioning PewDiePie. It's a plan that I've been watching so long since arguing in Brave New Books in Austin, Texas, with all the 9/11 truthers saying, look, you're destroying your own country. This is propaganda. It's a global agenda. If you're saying America's at fault for this, then you're part of the problem.
I think it's a really good point. Emily, you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. Freeman, did you ever read that book by David E. Martin called Coup de 12? It was a fiction book, but in my opinion, that's probably the best description of what happened on 9/11. And it was basically what you're saying. It was global, corporate, and technological, right? That you know what I mean? It was a coup of all these things kind of coming together that had almost nothing to do with the political system inside the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You can't think internally anymore. We have to see the leaders and the manipulators of the social engineers as global. You know, these corporations, they're not in America. They're not American. They have no nation.
All the stuff, even when take it right down to like all the mind control and the gang stalking, electronic harassment. This is corporate at this point. Corporations are global. They're transnational. They're not. You know what I mean? None of like now to point to say, oh, it's the CIA doing it or the whatever. Yeah, like sure, there's some level of connection or attachment, but all of this stuff at this point is being orchestrated from outside of the nation states.
Yeah, and if you want to get into the occult, then realize that the very first forms of magic known in ancient Egypt were contracts and talismans, right? And how do you form a corporation? You get 3 people together to sign a contract, and you have a golem. You have an immortal being that has more power than humans and can live forever. You know, how old are some of these corporations? You know, 150 years and more.
They go back to the Dutch East India Trading Company.
Right. Go all the way back to East India and everything else. You know,
Carta, compacts, and all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the talismans, of course, being the money, the dollars, and whichever form of currency.
Right.
But yeah, so they can create immortal golems that have no nation, that control, the World Wide Web, obviously, and everything that we say, and then instigate these. What are we going to call them? Like panic modes. They give everybody the thing to be hateful for that day.
Yeah, I think they're trauma traps, right? I mean, traps, we're just the whole plan is to keep everybody on the edge of trauma, right? Get them in fight or flight constantly, and then in that state, everybody can more easily be programmed to whatever degree they want to turn that dial up to. Yeah, and that's been in play for a while now.
Let me give you a quick synopsis of the Because It's True lecture, just real fast to show you how this worked for me. When Bill Clinton was taken down for an extramarital affair, getting a blowjob in the White House, right, from Monica Lewinsky. This doesn't happen, right? You don't destroy your national leader's credibility in front of the world. And they brought Bill Clinton out in front of everybody, turned purple, talking about insertions of cigars into his secretary, right? So that moment to me was the defining moment. I said, this is not the way we treat, any national leader. This is going to start to crumble everything. So they took down this man of the people, his sax playing. And then I said, well, next they should force a president into office. And that I heard about W, and I said, it'll be W because he's the 66, the fallen angel number. And they need to force him into office and make it obvious, because this destroys the system. So first they took down the man, Bill Clinton, then the system with forcing a president in office, made it obvious through Jeb Bush. And then I said, okay, so the next president will be constitutionally inviolable. The birther movement, Barack Obama. All right. Now, this is all on record, right? I said this before it happened, before anybody had heard the name Barack Obama. I said the next president will be questioned in his viability. And sure enough, boom, birther. And then the honey boo boo effect. No one divided the country bigger and more than Donald Trump. And I've never seen such division. We're so close to civil war. It's ridiculous. So that was the pattern that I saw unfolding to destroy the nation. Take down the president, take down the system, take down the Constitution, and put in a buffoon. It was simple.
Well, here we are, and we seem to be reaching this cul-de-sac of activity. It all seems to be compressing. And to what point will the pipes burst here? I mean, I think that's really kind of what we're staring down. Before we get into Austin and some of the Alex Jones and Rogan stuff, I want to just talk a little bit about Michael Jackson and some of the inside information that I actually know about Michael. Now, I wasn't really close to this guy, but he was a very, very dear friend of a girlfriend of mine back in the 90s. And so I spent some time with him. And he was the son of a very famous Hollywood writer. And he himself had some acting stints and some sitcoms. And, he's somebody that, if you looked him up, pretty well known, been around the business all his life. And so when the Michael Jackson stuff was happening, he was basically breaking it down. Like, look, there was stuff going on at Neverland. And one of the things that Michael did happen, and I actually want to get into whether this was actually Michael Jackson, because that's a whole other conversation, right? So what was happening at Neverland is that when you would go into the main house there, right, there was a bedroom, there was Michael's bedroom, and then there was another bedroom that was connected to Michael's bedroom. It was the secret bedroom. And everything was cameraed off and wired so that if somebody walked into the main hall to come towards the bedroom, the cameras would come on in what was the secret bedroom, and he could see everything, right? So this is on the record. He knew about this, and he knew people in the business that were like sending their kids over there. So something did happen at Neverland. Now, whether that active, that's a whole other question. Now, I witnessed an interview, and maybe you know about this, Emily and Freeman, with a guy by the name of Dave. Have you seen this interview with Larry King? Okay, you guys, you watch this, you listen, look up the interview with Dave on Larry King. And Dave supposedly was a young guy that had been befriended by Michael Jackson. And the reason why he'd been befriended by Michael Jackson was because Dave had been severely burned as a child, okay? So there is a theory that Dave is actually Michael Jackson. And that when he had that accident with the Pepsi commercial, he was burned far greater than people understand. And that what they did is they came up with basically a replacement Michael, whether it was a clone or whether it was an actual stand-in, that there was a difference between this quote-unquote new Michael, right? So it's a really interesting theory to take into account. So what I would encourage people is look up the Dave interview with Larry King. It's a real hidden, possibly hidden in plain sight moment. To that extent, Freeman, you're right. Michael Jackson may not be theoretically culpable, but whoever this other character, who this other person might have been, perhaps they were. So I want to throw that out there.
Yeah, what strange times we live in, right? Where they're trying to stop us from genetically modifying babies, and we have glow-in-the-dark kittens. It's a time where you could talk about there being a clone of Michael Jackson, and nobody's going, well, that's just out there, man. I mean, most people do still think that, but if they were to even like Michael Jackson and go and find out what Michael was into, they'd find out that his DNA is held by Clonaid, and they're very excited about being able to clone Michael,
Right.
There's just legislation in the way, but of course they said, we don't worry about that. So yeah, these are the times that we're in right now. Look at Michael Jackson's children. They are all genetically modified openly. It's well known that Blanket, the little baby Blanket, they don't know who his parents are, right? Like, this is the age we're in.
Yeah. Michael Jackson, lives here in Los Angeles lived here in the San Fernando Valley, grew up. As a child, I was taken to his family home in Hidden Hills by an ex-girlfriend of my father who was a dog trainer. And it's the weirdest thing because this was before a lot of this news about how the weird stuff he did and the way he lived was. All I really remember about being in his house was being taken down a hallway and shown a room where that thing that I later found out was the hyperbaric chamber that he slept in was, right? So Joan was training the dog, and that was my dad's girlfriend. And I remember standing there in this room looking at this thing that looked sort of like a capsule or a tanning bed or whatever, right? I don't remember anything about the dog or anything like that. It was in Hidden Hills, which is just, sort of west of the San Fernando Valley, right? Just sort of north and west of the San Fernando Valley. It's a very wealthy area. The only other time I'd ever been in Hidden Hills was a gymnastics coach of mine later lived there. And it was kind of an interesting trip back to Hidden Hills because it's gated and whatnot. So, I thought that is weird that I just have that. Freeman, I have to tell you, I loved your work on Michael Jackson and the whole time traveling connection you've made with him. The other kind of feeling I have about Michael Jackson is just related to him from dancing. There's videos of Michael Jackson dancing when he was like 10 and he's house dancing. There was no house music yet. Right. So he's house dancing to a music he's doing the dance of a music that doesn't even exist yet. Which he was like very clearly like time displacement for him. Right. So, I mean, I just, it's a very I've spent a lot of time around house music and that kid was doing it before it existed. Right. So I always had the feeling that he was traveling in and out of time and inserting himself and or being inserted in different spaces. And when I saw your video about him as, time travel and all that, I was just like, that's exactly it. You got that exactly right.
It's true. I mean, he was engineering a robot to receive his soul. He was running around with Uri Geller trying to figure out how to, live forever.
Yeah.
And then he bought King Tut's sarcophagus or a replica.
Right.
And then,
Do you remember his Disney experience, Prince EO? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My friends wouldn't go in it, so I only got to see it when it came on the internet. But I was at Disney. I've been at Disney. I grew up at Disney. My mom knew Walt Disney for a moment. They sold property for him and stuff before Disney World existed.
So this is a good segue because one of the things I talked about last week or earlier this week was how Michael Jackson and what's going on and the end of Neverland, right? It's like the closing of a chapter of people's experience, right? It was almost like this sacrificial kind of event where this ideal was being sort of relegated to flames and burned. And as I was around Austin last week, I realized that Austin is becoming like a playground, like an amusement park, with scooters everywhere. And I thought, well, this is the model for the new city because people have been raised on amusement parks. They love amusement parks. So if you want to get people to participate, live inside of a Agenda 21, Emerald Kingdom, this is the new model. So we end the old model of Neverland and we move the new model forward, which is where we are right now in Austin. And I think this is a great place to sort of just jump in and talk about this place. Maybe Freeman, you can give people some insight into the esoteric cults.
Right. And absolutely, America is slated to be the shopping mall theme park of the global order, of the new world order. That's what America does, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see that all those little communities that have built up, the little self-sustaining, well, not self-sustaining, but the corporataining areas like the Triangle, where you've got your house, your shopping, and all of your thing, and you don't ever have to leave your parking lot. Keeping everybody in these little triangular containments there. One of the first places I saw that was Austin.
That's right.
Right. Just don't have to leave.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's getting to that point. So Austin, Texas, man, what a trip. If you want to get into some of the high strangeness that people could enjoy looking at and going to see, I would start from the Charles Whitman Tower, or the UT Tower, as it's known in
First school shooting, right?
Yeah, exactly. And but the tower starts the sigil. So what you need to realize first is that it's Freemasonry, and Freemasonry worships Sirius. So when you get that straight, then you can see all the symbolism. So if you're standing at the UT Tower, and then you have George Washington, and in front of George Washington is Columbia, our goddess. You know, the District of Columbia is our leader, and this is my goddess.
I love your dog. Welcome. What's her name again?
Diva.
Diva, that's right. Welcome, Diva. Cats are in the rooms as well.
Yeah, I should have sent you some of my photography from there as well.
So this is the UT Tower. This is the Charles Whitman Tower, right?
Right, where the shootings occurred there. And, of course, military connections, DARPA connections, all that weird stuff going on. I don't know if DARPA, but military intelligence, things like that. But that wasn't really the point, because I was getting more into the esoteric arts, because right in front of that, let me see if I can send you, well, it's okay. I could send you some pictures if you think it would be worthwhile.
Why don't you just go ahead and fill it in? We'll
Okay.
visualize it for now.
All right. So right in front of that tower is the goddess. She stands there with her angel wings, and she is riding a chariot being drawn forth by fishmen riding fish horses. And to her right is a pentagram, and to her left is a shell. This statue was put up in 1933 in honor of the war. And realize that you live in a country whose capital is the District of Columbia, and nobody knows who Columbia is. As far as I know, I'm the only expert. There you go.
That's it.
And that big one would be the phallus. Okay. And then, of course, you've got the phallus with the fountain, which makes the hermaphrodite. And this all ties together. But what goes on from there is that's our goddess Columbia. And then directly in front of her is the Capitol Dome, where the goddess also stands on top of, holding a pentagram on the Capitol Dome. If you get a close look at the Austin, Texas Capitol goddess and set her next to Semiramis in the ancient Sumerian, just put her up against any ancient Sumerian god, and you'll see that she has that face, that form. It's very bizarre. And they say that they disfigured her face like that so that it would look normal from the ground, which is just crazy. But if you compare the goddess on top of the capital of the Austin Capitol, you will see it's a Sumerian goddess. So now you have your obelisk, the UT Tower, with all the symbolism in between, with the Columbia and the fish people, with the Capitol Dome standing in direct alignment of that, and then the pentagram on top of that. That is a massive Egyptian hieroglyph for the star Sirius. An obelisk, a dome with a pentagram. Look it up. That is the hieroglyph for Sirius in Egypt. So that entire structure, which you'll find in every capital, but it's more prominent in Austin, is a giant symbol of Sirius made out of the city. Now, right next to Columbia, the goddess on the ground with the fish people, is the Harry Ransom Center. And that is where they house Aleister Crowley's handwritten Book of the Law, the one that he just transcribed by talking to Horus after a visit to the Great Pyramid. And really his wife, Rose, had everything to do with it. But that is the Book of the Law that founded and structures the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis. Now, another thing that the shooter in New Zealand, Christchurch, mentioned was the Templar. And the OTO are the Order of the Eastern Templar. And that's a magical order that no one talks about. Everybody's like Illuminati, 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 when they honestly should be looking at OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, who claim openly on their website to be direct descendant of the Illuminati, but Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean that's the beginning of weirdness, keeping Austin weird.
Yeah.
See where you want to go next.
Well, I wanted to bring up that photo of the Capitol building, so we could take a peek at that. I managed to grab that. Just go back to Emily. You want to chime in and say something?
Yeah. So, Freeman, what do you? I think the way that Austin is situated is really interesting too. The way that like the inner part of the city is sort of surrounded by the lakes and on around it, and then you have the river kind of coming through it. You have Edwards Aquifer underneath it. You have a green belt around it. It's almost like creating like an engulfed, encapsulated place. I mean, it's very, I mean, you could feel the difference energetically when you moved over the bridge from downtown down to like, over like across like either Lamar or Congress or whatever, when you would go over the lake, right? And then you were down like in Travis Heights area. There's an energetic perceptual difference between, like that coming over the lake there, right? And that's where the bats come, they gather there. It's such an interesting space. And some of it has occurred naturally, but so much of Austin was created. A lot of those lakes are man-made, right? A lot of that kind of stuff has been created. This is not the natural lay of the land, is it?
Oh, you're getting a little too geographic for me there, but what I have definitely noticed in traveling into major Masonic cities is that the water is a major part of the system, and that the places chosen absolutely function around such things. So Lawrence, Kansas is another one that's amazing, and it's the dead center of the United States. I ended up moving from Lawrence, Kansas to Austin, Texas. So it was a very Masonic move. In Lawrence, Kansas, the symbol for the town is the city burning and a phoenix rising up through it. And they have some strange kind of Lucifer angel burning at the top of the city center. But there again, in Lawrence, Kansas, there's massive hills and running water. There's streams running through and under the Mason Temple, which you'll find often in these Masonic cities, and probably why they chose DC to put it in a swamp,
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. There's an energetic field that you hit, and you can see it when you go to Austin. You can feel it in the people that live there. There's no spot I've ever been that's been so aware and awake and alive. And it's unfortunate that corporations like the racing industry came in there and just, the place got run over. I mean, there's just too many people there. You can't get anywhere in these days. Yeah, so there's kind of a compilation of the Columbia that stands in front of the tower with the Starbucks logo. You wouldn't see that. That's an explanation of how corporations will also use these same magical sigils for Freemasons to recognize. And it's not like Starbucks had the best coffee. It was because they're in the club, and they displayed that in their corporate logo. Just as to her left and to her right is the Pentagon and the Shell. You're back to Texaco and Shell with gas stations. And again, these symbols come up and up and up, but it's not Illuminati, it's Freemasonic. And it all goes back to Sirius and the goddess and Lucifer. But you got to understand Lucifer.
Got to understand Lucifer. They're rolling out his show now, right? This is theoretically his time.
Yeah. But I want to know where that story comes from.
The Lucifer story?
The Lucifer story.
Yeah,
Nowhere in the Bible does it say Lucifer was the most beloved angel of God and had such an ego that he was cast down with a third of the angels. It doesn't say that anywhere.
I tend to think that it comes from this theme of these brothers which show up in these cross-cultural, cosmological stories, right? There's going to be Enlil and Enki. There's Pocong Hoya, there's Yahweh, there's Lucifer. There's something to this tale of creation with these two brothers, and whether and one of them will always represent some form of order, an overarching order, right? Like Yahweh. Meanwhile, Lucifer says, "Hey, I'm a fan of man."
Where
is it? Where does it show up?
Where does Lucifer ever speak?
No, I'm talking about like Enki. Enki is.
Right. But I'm just trying to understand, because this is a big problem.
Right.
For me as a symbologist.
Right.
when people say Illuminati corporate logos, even though I put that on my website because that's what people Google, it was never that. And so there's a misnomer and a misunderstanding. And the same with Lucifer. If somebody can tell me where the story of Lucifer comes from, I would be greatly impressed.
Well, wouldn't it be the rising star, the star of the East Venus? Isn't Venus Lucifer?
No, this whole story of Lucifer being the original rebel.
Oh, okay.
The story everyone tells, and the connection of how that connects to Satan. It just doesn't exist, you see.
Lucifer and Satan are two different entities.
Right, exactly. These connections don't. So, what I'm trying to also impose in this is the mindset that people get about things without knowing where they come from.
Right.
That's my fault.
Well, I believe Lucifer is a superimposition also, right, of Prometheus. It's another telling.
Prometheus would be much better, yeah.
Variation of the tale, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is no tale of Lucifer.
No.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist. There's one sentence in the Bible, and it's not even referencing Satan. It's referencing Nebuchadnezzar,
So this is a really good point. Now, if it doesn't show up in the Bible, clearly it's adopted, right? It is an adopted mythology or an adopted icon.
Exactly.
We've got the Lucis Trust. There's a lot of Luciferic symbolism. So where does that come from?
Right. And for them, it's more Prometheus.
Right.
Man reaching the stars type of scenario. For a Freemason to say, yeah, I worship Lucifer. For them, Lucifer's an entirely different character with no connection to Satan. It's this achievement of man.
Right.
And so Prometheus would be better because people hear the word Lucifer and they get all this priestcraft knowledge who said all this. I mean, I have my ideas that perhaps this whole idea of Lucifer being the fallen angel that brought all the angels down and all of that comes from Dante and Milton, Paradise Lost and Inferno. Then but then you're following occultists in their explanation of Lucifer, and so real point being, this is so hard to get out, but is just the way that we adopt things without ever questioning, without ever, and it's this running theme, just like the fall of America, as I've witnessed it and predicted it through probability, saying, okay, well, this was what would be next if I were going to rule the world, and predict, W being forced in, predict Obama's birther thing. Same way, this whole Lucifer story, Illuminati, corporate logos, none of it means anything. You know what I mean? If you don't know its root, if you don't know where it comes from, if you don't understand it, then you're just babbling BS belief systems.
I like that, the BS belief system.
Well, that gets into this whole idea of people being indoctrinated, right? And Emily and I have talked about this, which is along the lines of the revelation of the method or the externalization of the hierarchy. I mean, we've spent a long time, or at least probably the last decade or so, right, in the process of decoding, demystifying. And as a result of that, there's a lot of symbolic information that gets passed around. And so in many instances, people are inadvertently being moved into a mystery cult, even by dissecting it and trying to understand it, whether they're aware of it or not. And that's a whole other part of what's going on here, right? Because we're immersed in it and now we're trafficking in it. And even right now we're talking about it.
Right. Absolutely. And in the age of ridicule, it's a good time for buffoonery, I guess. As an example would be that I did 3-4 lectures showing how the Monster Drink logo is 666 in Hebrew, right? And for me, studying Hebrew, I saw it immediately. As soon as the Monster Drink logo came out, I was like, I just saw 666 because I'm conditioned to Hebrew. Well, I lecture after lecture after lecture, maybe 10,000 views, right? But then this lady comes out and she's being all crazy at a conference, sitting next to some table in this crowd. And she's like, look, it's 666. And she's showing the Hebrew and the Monster Drink logo. That video of this lady acting like a fool got millions of views, millions of views. Okay, on my YouTube channel, I've never reached 1 million views, right? Ever. I've been one of the longest running shows on. I am the longest running show on YouTube, and
wow,
yeah, you look it up. It's true. I'm in a documentary even about it, but I've never hit 1 million views, right? I put on this video from Free Your Mind of Stuart Swerdlow that everybody hated. Guess how many views it has? 1 million, right? I mean, I've given 12 years of lectures and they 10,000 views, you know what I mean? And this thing they hate.
It's good. It keeps you humble, Freeman.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm happy where I'm at.
It'd be insufferable if you had 1 million. Okay, just
oh yeah, I don't want to be Alex Jones. You know, I don't want that. I don't want that. You know.
Okay, so let's.
But the idea is that ridicule is what is being popularized.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of that, because you are not Alex Jones, and neither am I, and neither are Robert. But all of us
together we are.
Together
right.
we are. Right?
Well, Alex is becoming us, and that's what's awesome.
So here's all of us, for some reason or another, we're drawn into Austin, right? Like so I mean, kind of where we want to go with this is like, what's going on in Austin, right? What is the point of this? Like, I was just kind of, you know, what you talked about, Freeman, that energy, that vibe, whatever. I was drawn to Austin. You know, I went there in what seemed like a natural pull to me. A family that I used to babysit for, they had moved there, and I went and visited them, and I liked it. And I went there, and suddenly within like a month of living there, I had more friends there than I'd ever had my whole life anywhere else. And all of the things that people teased me about and didn't like me for my whole life was what made me popular in my scene there. And I got to just be myself. But I would also, and that was amazing. But that's kind of a really nice way to induce somebody to a cult, right? On a certain level, or to like a different kind of experience, because Austin was also, you know, where I started to really experiment on a different level with psychedelic drugs, right? It was where I first understood that there was like something else out there. I had always been kind of like an atheist or a more materialist type person, or at least I thought I was before that. It was where I first sort of understood that the environment and the atmosphere was sort of interactive. And, you know, I had those experiences of observing myself, and then observing myself. And then this idea that there was things around me that were aware of me. It was the first place I had the feeling, even though I wouldn't have classified it as that then, of being surveilled, right? Of like something being aware of me when I felt should be alone. I was not alone. There was something looking at me. There was something watching me. It wasn't like in a paranoia way. Like, you know, it wasn't like that. It was just like, this is interesting. And I hadn't, you know, I had till this day, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I've lived in New York and all sorts of weird places. I'd say probably most of the weirdest experiences of my life occurred in Austin. And so, you know, that, what is going on there? And then also, like, you know, why is Austin so much the focus of all of this stuff that is going on now? Why is Alex from there? Why is this, you know, on it, sort of like, you know, I don't know if you got a chance to watch the Matthew North's video about Joe Rogan Exposed, but so much of whatever is going on in this new frontier of the psychological war sort of based out of Austin.
Yeah, that one's beyond me, honestly. I mean, you know.
Nothing is beyond you, Freeman. Come on.
Hey, I got a quick little note from the chat room. Eileen wanted to remind us that Lucifer appears in Paradise Lost by Milton. You know, and I think
that's what I said.
Yeah, biblical reference not, but Milton, yes.
Yeah, Milton and Dante. Yeah. So, you know, if you take it, then you're realizing that you're actually getting your information from an esotericist. So just be, you know what I mean? Like, if you're afraid of magic and you're believing the story of Lucifer, well, it was written by magicians, you know?
Yeah.
You know, same as Baphomet. Everybody's all freaked out over Baphomet, the goat-headed god with the caduceus. And that was created by a Catholic, you know, by a Christian, you know, Baphomet. So I just feel like there's so much reactionaryism going on, and it just drives me crazy, because I watch as my work turns from science to mythology. you know, and I think maybe we're in such a fast pace now that these things happen almost immediately, you know, whereas I did all the research to explain the corporate logos and what they meant and where their origins come from and how they relate to Freemasonry. And now there's this whole mythology of the Illuminati. Like, who are the Illuminati? And then you can get 6 different answers to that question. You know, so if you don't have an answer, then you're not having a science, you're having a belief system, and you're working out of mythology, not history or science.
And both have their place if you come at it from the right perspective.
Well, unless you're turning science into a mythology, right? Then you got Scientology, right?
Which is what we have.
Right. And exactly. So, yeah. I don't know. It's a tough one, man. It's a tough one. People live in their heads. No one really wants to dig deep and trying to find out the roots of things. And
I think it's because things are happening so fast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we're grabbing. We're like, you know, we're like golden, you know, the golden corral. We're just grabbing stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's out there. And, you know, is it going to be the most kind of spiritually nutritious? Is it really going to feed us? And I think ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to ward off evil. I mean, let's be clear. There are some dark forces operating in this domain right now.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And so I think what people are trying to do, and this goes back to your talisman sort of concept, that we're trying to find talismans to ward us off against these dark forces that are swirling around us right now. So when people do grab something like Baphomet or Lucifer, I mean, they're kind of using them in some ways as a shield, you know, to you know, bounce these energies back in some ways. And I don't know if I blame them. I can't really blame them because people are just trying to cope. And whether or not they've got the right information or the deeper knowledge, well, that's a whole other subject altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. A bunch of thoughts going through my head. Not sure which one to start with.
It's all right. We have a little bit of time. Yeah. You can marinate on that back here. And maybe we could jump into this Alex and Joe thing, because this also was part of our discussion. And, you know, Matthew North, this young guy, Matthew North, coming in and doing like a 2.5 hour major deconstruction of Rogan, which I thought was really interesting to a large extent. And, you know, this gets back into this whole idea with Austin, remodification, Alex Jones, and Emily and I were talking about, you know, how entheogens now went from like a priest caste or a priest class. Now they're moving into this warrior caste, you know, through MMA. It's a very interesting kind of transition here. And it's becoming, you know, this vehicle to move into the mainstream, right? Athletics and sports are mainstream. You know, the high priests of psychotropics are not mainstream. And just the other day, Gwyneth Paltrow was talking about how the future of medicine is microdosing. Okay, so this is where all this is headed. And it's the MMA guys that seem like they're kind of a vehicle for this.
Yeah.
We're hitting them from all sides, Emily. It's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Freeman, you could just talk about the place that the theogens have had on consciousness and the mainstream of that effect. And what do you think that will do for sort of this kind of, you know, broader, you know, scope of the population?
Sorry, I hadn't thought about any of these things. So yeah.
So
apparently I have, but I could talk for a while about it if you want. But I think it's an interesting thing that we're watching, we're witnessing, because, you know, these are ideas that at one point were outside of the culture. You know, taking acid, dropping mushrooms. Joe Rogan's now munching on mushrooms, you know, during his podcast. You know, what is that saying? Well, this is the new sacrament.
Has he munched on mushrooms during his podcast?
That's right. Absolutely.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
One of the things, you know, Freeman, that we kind of, that, you know, Robert and I have been talking about and some of the shows we've done and whatnot is just, you know, this culture creation that has come out of Austin, right? And that was part of this we wanted to talk to you today, because it's so interesting. All these people, everything seems focused on Austin like it's like a small bubble petri dish, like a laboratory for experimentation with. The cleaning lady just turned the vacuum on. Hold on a second, guys. I need to tell her to turn that off. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I mean, there's places with definitive energy, and as a nomad, one that travels around like I did in a van, you're drawn
Sorry
to
about that, guys.
and Austin's definitely one of those sources where the vortex energy is alive. And then I always find that in these very same areas are universities and Freemason temples. These are always there together in these vortexes that draw us in. Like Lawrence, Kansas, I was mentioning, is another major one that draws you in. And
isn't Lawrence a place where they've got a ton of fountains? Or is that Omaha? There's a city, it's either Omaha or Lawrence. It's got like 25 or 30 fountains all over the city.
Yeah, I don't think that's Lawrence.
I think it's Omaha. That's a really interesting piece too, with these various fountains and kind of water temples, right in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
So Emily, you were talking about Austin and kind of the incubator, right?
Yeah. So I've in my time since I left Austin, and Freeman, you and I had an interesting show a couple of years ago, and we got into a little bit of talk about Austin. And after that, I heard from some people that I knew from the dance music scene, who were kind of like, thank you for finally saying some of these things, because I've always thought that, but I thought maybe I was crazy to think that. For me, when I went there, I got thrown. I thought maybe today we could kind of talk about what living in Austin was like for us, because this is where so much of this is stemming out of. And for me, when I went there, I had some of those experiences, like I told you, like about just feeling the energy differently and whatnot. But I was thrown into a pretty high level underground music or rave scene that in this small city was on the same level as what was going on in Los Angeles. But Austin is very small. And so I was able to be very connected, and everything was kind of taking place, downtown or off at the Austin City Music Hall or some of these other places. And it was almost the feeling for me then, right, was kind of like what we imagine a smart city is going to be going forward, right? I felt connected to something when I was in that area downtown. I remember I would leave the Austin City Music Hall after a night of listening to house and techno and whatever, and maybe I had done some psychedelics and whatever. But when I left, the city seemed to be involved in whatever was going on in my head. And as I left the city and would go back over the bridge, down to South Congress where I lived at the time, I could look back in the city and it did have that look of being like what Robert's talking about, almost like an amusement park, right? And of course you have the Owl Building and all those tall buildings down there. And at that time they were doing a lot of construction, and it almost had this technological look that didn't look like what we imagine the natural or real world to look like. And it felt to me, and feels to me like in hindsight, like at that time, the rave scene or the different music scenes were sort of where they were like almost experimenting with stuff, like what was going on with some of these psychedelics, some of these, drugs in that space, downtown there where there are certain energies. And now you see that, the next kind of thing that came big in Austin after, they shut that rave scene down in the early 2000s. Then the information scene started coming out of Austin, right? Like then you have Alex Jones and yourself was there, and, that becomes sort of like that was like sort of the next scene or whatever that I kind of became involved in or inducted into. Now, I wasn't so into that when I was in Austin, even though that was developing. I got into that when I left there. But there's so much of these development or tinkering with these cultures there. And now you see, like, as the thing with Alex Jones has evolved and, Robert and I have talked about in some ways it may be coming to an end. And I called our podcast last time, No More Sacred Cows, because I consider this whole thing with Alex and Joe and all this sort of an end of the era of Sacred Cow Productions, which I think their whole presence on this alternative media scene has been a production. The next thing we're starting to see is stuff, and it's been developed for a while, but it's coming forefront, is like this culture that is developed by Joe Rogan and Aubrey Marcus, who has this On It with the nootropics, and they're all into this MMA and taking ayahuasca and DMT and psychedelics, and they train all day and they eat healthy and they're on a ketogenic diet. This also seems to be largely based and being controlled on a certain level out of Austin. And so I just found that fascinating. What, wanted to know sort of what your thoughts were on that, and what your, what Austin felt like for you, what your experience of. Did you feel like you were being sort of observed, or, even in hindsight, like that you were part of some sort of greater experiment, or, greater, I feel like Austin is like a petri dish, and like a laboratory being tinkered, and things are being thrown in and pulled out and adjusted and tuned, and trying to create this megalopolis that Robert likes to talk about.
Well, I definitely felt like I had my own personal helicopter. I remember one night sleeping in my van. I lived on the streets when I was making the Freeman perspective. Mm-hmm. And they came and circled my van with their helicopter. Cops came all around, but they went to this house instead, who was a friend of mine. The neighbors, it was a weird scenario. Just the cops all came in, ran around, and then left. It was like just some sort of scare tactic. But I don't know. The level that you're talking of manipulation, I don't know anything about that. I don't know of Austin being some sort of petri dish or a setup or anything like that. When I got there, I wasn't planning on staying. I was only there for the weekend, but then they gave me the TV show. Uh-huh. And so that weekend turned into 5 years. And I loved Austin until it started getting overloaded, and, you have to really plan your day. You got to get everything done on those damn highways and make your circles and stuff. But, the whole joke of the guy killing himself after designing the highway system. Did they ever get those two overpass to meet? I don't know.
Right. Isn't that weird? Yeah.
There's this whole, but anyway, I just don't have anything to say on that level of like ethnogens and being used and things in Austin as a experiment.
When did you get here, Freeman?
What year was that? 2004.
Okay. Yeah. My first experience was 96. Mm-hmm. And I was here.
Was a pivotal year.
Yeah, I was here for the Whole Life Expo. I was doing tarot readings, right. and not far from where I'm actually broadcasting from, there was a multi-story parking garage on the mall, which is no longer there. And I was told that I could go park on the top of that garage in my van, because I was in my van at the time. And I spent close to 2 weeks, on that parking garage, or that top structure.
I was so welcomed.
That one, are you talking about that parking structure downtown? Like,
it's actually just north of where I am right now at the Whole Foods. It's no longer there anymore. Yeah, it's gone.
Let's go Joe Rogan and Alex. I don't want to lose that real quick.
All right, let's go there.
Since, we've been going over that. And the idea was, one, people weren't battling over whose information was correct. It was more of a, which icon do you like better, Joe or Alex? When the Alex-Joe war began. And Alex obviously pulled some seriously low blows on Joe, and Joe came out the cooler head. Well, when they came back together, okay, now realize when Alex Jones was on the television there in Austin Access Television, and then I came in, I flipped the script on him and started getting into the occult, the esoteric. There was never a show like mine, right? Like no one had ever discussed these things openly on the air like that. And so people started asking Alex, why aren't you more like Freeman? Why aren't you more like Freeman? And this really annoyed him, right? And you'll notice there was a moment where his whole attitude shifted. He had to. I had forced him into having David Icke on, having Michael Tessarian on, having different magicians on, and starting to talk about clockwork elves and the DMT theories, right? These were things that I forced onto Alex inadvertently. I didn't intentionally do this. It was just that, he got so much pressure because he would leave the seat and I would sit down. I immediately followed him. And so, I was like nursing Alex Jones's audience, right? And then, so he was getting all this, hey, why aren't you more like Freeman? So now you go on to that last Joe Rogan with Alex Jones episode, and you'll hear Alex saying everything I've been saying for the last 25 years. And for especially the last 14 years, in the ideas of this manipulation through gene editing, through cloning into interdimensional beings contacted by the use of DMT. And, if you want to talk about like hippie systems that are used as petri dishes like that, then we could talk about the dead. I followed the dead for a long time. Yeah. And and the DMT ran crazy in the dead scene. These guys would smoke it recreationally. And all around, you'd smell this horrid smell of like rotting flesh. And I always knew that was the death smell of DMT. I mean, if you've ever smelled it, you got to know what I'm talking about. But I never did it, right?
I think that's what we're talking about here, is that this right now, this culture that's being created around, Joe Rogan, and that is, even though Joe Rogan's not from Austin, a lot of his business is there, and this energy, this thing that's being created there is the new version of that, right? Like it's moved from the underground music culture into this sort of underground MMA thing that is now being brought, to the mainstream, and that, we're ceasing to live in an organic world. So the new playground will be inside people's head, inside these cities.
Yeah, you live in a simulation anyway, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Why leave your house? Yeah. And so now Alex is speaking all of this. I don't know if you saw the Alex or Joe Rogan episode. It was epic, right?
Yeah.
So it was the last one, although it was, so horribly bad was what made it epic. But Alex is trying desperately to share the knowledge that, I've been calmly sharing over the years. And he now understands that he was a threat by the whole 9/11 truth movement, and that the whole idea of destroying your own government from the inside. He said all of this on Joe Rogan, right? Like, oh my God, I realized that I'm the fanatic and I'm creating more fanatics, which is what I told him.
Well, I think his programming is breaking down too. I mean, I think there's something going on with Alex.
That's hard doing this. Anybody would break down. They warn you about that when you join Access Television. And if you do this as a martyr, if you take this on as if you're the champion of the people, you're going to break down.
Well, it's a limited shelf life, right? And Alex was on top for a long time, and it takes a huge amount of energy, takes a huge amount of intensity and focus.
Yeah. I made 7 of Alex Jones's DVDs.
And I think he's also got some background programming going on too. And I think that's starting to, break down in and of itself, right? I mean, I think we're seeing kind of and this, to me, this goes back to the whole thing with the truth movement, in that it's a limited hang, and it too is, theoretically breaking down. It was supposed to break down in some ways as a simulated movement.
Alex is exactly what I expected and what I predicted when 9/11 happened. I predicted Alex Jones,
Yeah. There's I'm going to say this.
But they don't need to manipulate him into it. The engineering did it. You know what I mean? I don't think Alex is a paid shill. I don't think he's being manipulated. I don't think he's being forced to say what he's saying.
You don't think Alex has handlers or people that either support him or sponsor his shows?
Oh yeah, but he does. He's still him. He's not. I mean, sure, there's certain things that you might not say. Like you didn't want to. Like I wouldn't talk about you because I wanted to not offend. Point being that after meeting Alex and hanging out with him, I don't believe he was actually like a paid thing put in there in front of us to become this. He was this. And
Bill Cooper would
then he was given the ability to rise.
Right. Well, that's true.
I think that I think the way mind control works more now, and the way this kind of stuff works, is you find somebody who has a natural tendency for something anyway, and then you just make the situation available for them to become the thing that that they're going to become, and run the agenda that you want to run through them. And I think the same goes for
control. You fund it. Yeah. I had a CIA agent tell me that they secretly fund Alex Jones.
Right.
But, he didn't know. He just gets the donations. You know what I mean?
Do you think that Austin, or just access television in certain markets in general, but particularly in Austin there, that one's had particularly interesting people go through there, that these, intelligence agencies and corporations kind of know that, and they sit there sort of waiting for some of these characters and folks to show up, and then they start running an operation through that, even unbeknownst to people.
Maybe that's why I never made it.
Well, it's interesting.
It was a totally different time back then, without the World Wide Web, without YouTube, without, Google Video had just begun when I started.
Yeah.
So the worldwide audience wasn't there.
Very, very different times. Yeah. The way that I see Alex and Joe, astrologically, they are exact opposite signs. Alex is born February 11th, and Joe's born August 11th. So we have 180 degrees of Aquarius and Leo. And Alex is the head, and Joe is the heart, supposedly, right? This is part of the alchemical kind of combination between Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, which is why I think in some ways people have found it to be so compelling, because of the astrological connotations. And both of those signs are fixed signs, which means that when there's attention and energy that is directed in that direction, people are it's going to be magnetic. People are going to conglomerate or aggregate around that. So, I think that there's something going on with those two cats.
Absolutely. If I can just throw in that fear factor, to me was like the initial social engineering. It was the first time I really said, oh my God, the devil's on television. Right. No, speaking of Joe Rogan, that was fear factor, getting people to eat things and do things that they wouldn't do, but they do for money, the Running Man scenario. So
it's like initiation into a cult, right? It's like initiation into a fraternity or a cult or whatever, doing all this gross stuff that you really shouldn't do, but you're doing it because you want to be part of something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so fear factor was the first time I personally went, oh, that's social engineering. And I had Joe Rogan on my list as the devil. That was what I called him all the way back then. So to see him now, in this whole situation, but obviously,
it's also interesting. He was on that show Talk Radio. Remember that? He was on Talk Radio, and his co-star was Phil Hartman. And Phil Hartman committed suicide, right? He killed his wife, or his wife killed him.
His wife.
His wife killed him.
Yeah.
Right. So he was on Talk Radio with Phil Hartman. And even the name, right? Heartman.
Yeah.
Heartman. And Joe Rogan's a Leo, right? Leo rules the heart. Now, are we talking about like an actual sacrificial hit on Phil Hartman so that Joe Rogan could progress? I'm not really, that's not what I'm saying. But getting into this weird realm, right, where these things begin to happen and aggregate. Well, you look at it and go, wow, that's a really interesting kind of moment in time in the trajectory and the career of Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And I don't know, to bring it all back around again too, though, and the propaganda in this situation would be, for me, Disney again. It comes back around, even though they're not connected as far as I know to Joe Rogan. But I lost that train of thought where I was going with that.
We're throwing a lot of stuff at you, dude. Yeah. It's all right. It's okay. So it feels to me like that show that everybody really.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of like the destruction of the inner core. The family unit. That all started with Fox, Married with Children, and now I guess Disney's buying Fox, or did. I'm not sure yet, but you can see the social engineering campaigns blatantly when you're aware of them.
Clearly.
And something like The Runner, which didn't make it to television but kept going. Something like Fear Factor, Married with Children, destroying the family core, and sponsoring and becoming the Simpsons. Fox was obviously an engineering campaign. Star Wars, and everybody took to it in archetypal form, so Disney bought that. Marvel was one of the biggest social engineering tools out there, using comic books.
Still is.
Well, yeah, so Disney bought it. I would like to see if Disney has any connections to Joe Rogan in that scenario, but you know, it's an engineered structure that reactionary people are constantly falling for. And maybe Austin is like the catalyst place where it goes good or bad. You know what I mean? Like, because for me, Austin was a bright spark, a bright light. And so
absolutely. I mean, I have a special place in my heart for Austin. I totally love it. And I also see, like, you know, I didn't understand what I was in at the time I was in it. I also see some of the things that have developed out of there. And I feel like it's a place where they, you know, a place like Los Angeles, there's like a million labs here, right? Like there's like a million scenes that are being experimented with, but it isn't an all-inclusive or like a encompassing kind of thing here, right? And same with, you know, other large cities. Austin is just the right size to sort of create a certain kind of environment that you can't do in Los Angeles, right? And it seems to me like, you know, that's the space, like it's the laboratory, right? It's the laboratory where things are being experimented with and fine-tuned before they're brought up and public to the masses. Like, you know, if you see the way that the festival and certain conference circuits and stuff are now, you know, South by Southwest and even Austin city limits to a certain extent were sort of a model of that, right? So now we have, you know, like Robert sitting there at South by Southwest right now. If you see the way tech companies have come up and become part of the culture, that, you know, there's a lot of that in Austin. And just what you were talking about at the very beginning with the triangle and the domain and this whole sort of like creating little cities or little pods within cities and things like that. I first saw that there too. You're now seeing that here in Los Angeles. There's something about Austin is just the right size to be able to test how bringing things from like a counterculture or an underground culture up into the mainstream, how that will go and how that can be used and manipulated to present the idea that this is something new and exciting and different and a breakaway kind of culture, when really it's just winding you right back into the control system.
It's curious because Spartanburg, a town near me, they just had on the news that they spent $6,000 on taxpayers' money to go to Fort Worth, Texas, and learn their skills on city management and how to engineer their city better. So that was just on the news last night. Now that you mentioned it, I didn't think about that. But they came to Fort Worth. I mean, have you seen Dallas? I mean, it looks like you're driving into your television or some horrific thing. So that one would be even more so in the Matrix kind of scenario. But of course, Dallas means door and is the, you know, the pentagram of the goddess. So yeah, I could see that. I mean, you know, when I followed around in the touring festivals and, you know, Widespread Panic, String Cheese, and the Dead, it was obviously this engineering campaign, one to pull all of the free thinkers into a loop so that they just kept following this Pied Piper around and never influenced society, right? You know, let's keep all these thinkers in this hole, and then let's give them, you know, as many drugs and hallucinogens as we possibly can. And you can see it like bubble up all of a sudden, like DMT. You know, I had never heard of people smoking DMT. I'd never seen it. I had heard of salvia at that point, but all of a sudden DMT was everywhere on tour and people are just smoking it recreationally. And this is, you know, what Alex Jones is now screaming about, being teleported into this other dimension where you're meeting mantis people or clockwork elves, and they're giving you directions and guidance and, you know, opening those doors to Dallas and bringing in entities into your soul. So, and
Dallas was one of the first places in the United States where ecstasy was sold legally at the start.
Yeah, so it was Orlando. And Orlando, oh my God.
Both rave spots.
Oh, in the 80s. Oh my God.
Rave spot.
The entire city was on ecstasy.
Same with Dallas.
Poor man's laughing at your face, you know? Everybody, the entire streets were just filled with people on smiling.
And of course, Orlando is where Disneyland is. So this is sort of like what we're talking about here is like the entire, you know,
well, okay, then let's go there. All right. Because Orlando, if you want to talk about that, Orlando was the original point of light in the 1,000 point of light system. They put a big phallus up in front of City Hall to honor George H.W. Bush and bringing us into the center of the points of light. Well, my elementary school was the first school to ever have a police officer.
Are you from Orlando?
Yeah.
Okay.
And cameras everywhere, right? Cameras up on the highways, cameras on buildings, cameras on housetops, never pointing at the highway. And there's no ticketing system, even to this day. And I'm talking about 1980, all right? I mean, obviously 80 or perhaps even earlier. So Orlando, was the first social system trying to bring this into play in that way. And we were the first point of light, which put it in this first police state. We had a group of thugs known as, let's see, there was the Duke Boys and then the Red Dogs between Florida and Georgia. The men who came to your house in vans with masks that were police officers and would just take people away. Like, that happens, right? That was normal. We knew about it. Everybody knew about it. The cameras all over the streets. When I got to Austin, Texas, and people were freaking out about the cameras there, right, on the street lights and stuff, I'm like, I'd already lived with that for 20 years. This was like, I was like, why are you guys all freaking out? You know what I mean? Like, this has been 20 years. But I didn't realize that Orlando was this first central point that started all of that until they blew up City Hall for lethal weapon and put up a giant phallus to honor HW for putting a point of light. And I made a video on that as well, showing you all the art and architecture that they put up in that. But so, yeah, it definitely that happens, and of course, culturally exuberant groups like people in Austin, like the Grateful Dead heads and, groups of people that have life, they are the ones they're going to target for the scenarios and engineering. But what's going on with this massive use of DMT? It terrifies me, honestly. I don't do any of that.
Well, I mean, I think it opens portals and gateways. It's the new circle, right? I mean, this is the new sort of access to John D technologies,
right?
Without the use of sigils and everything else that goes along with it. You just smoke a lawn chair, which is really what you do with DMT. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to create this. Alex Jones talks about the new Renaissance. The new Renaissance. This is something he has been, repeating again and again and again. And what it feels like to me, Freeman, is that the new tyranny isn't going to be the boot at the neck. The new tyranny is going to be some kind of false enlightenment, and they're going to herd people into, these feel-good Agenda 21 cities. There's lots of scooters and shared economy, and their version of summer. And this is what the new tyranny is going to be all about. People think it's going to be, death camps, and no, it's not. It's going to be environments that people will be lulled deeper into their trance, thinking that they're headed towards enlightenment.
In their human habitat zones.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I scream so heartily about the belief systems and how people start to make them into ideologies and using something like climate change, right? And making it your religion.
That's right.
So therefore now your religion of climate change, it makes it all okay. And so that's what I've been saying all along through this whole talk, is this idea of the belief systems that people adopt without ever once finding out why.
Really examining them, drilling down, and getting to the roots of.
I mean, why do you have to take your shoes off at the airport?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Climate change is definitely a religion. I was listening. I'm not going to go there. It's too far into it. But the climate change is the new religion. The certain aspects of certain kinds of diets now, right, are a new religion. On one hand, right. Veganism on one hand, and then maybe like a carnivore or a ketogenic diet on the other hand, right. And these people are separating into these sort of cults about other things that they believe politically and whatnot, based on some of this, right? So you have the climate cult, you have veganism cult, you have the carnivore or the keto cult, right? And these all sort of, blend back into these different groups. You can find this all in Austin. Like this was, right? Like these MMA cults. Have you heard about some of the stuff that goes back on in the background? I know you're not like a super athletic or, sports kind of fan or whatever, right, Freeman? But
I couldn't believe my friends were able to eat while watching that. To me, it was one of the most traumatizing, horrifying things I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe as I watched hammer fist after hammer fist to the face and the bloody pulp that was his nose, this is not something I would watch. This is, this is not entertainment. And
it doesn't represent a high point of society.
No, it's horrific. I mean, I would have never made it in the Roman times.
This is really interesting. I think that, MMA is like this new version of the gladiator films from the 50s.
I was just going to say
toys, right? They have toys in the toy section, right? Yeah. I'm just saying.
You look at those gladiator films from the 50s, like Victor Mature and stuff, and and all their sweaty, glistening bodies, which were all directed by homosexual directors, right? Because they love that genre. I think MMA's just kind of replaced it. And that's the new version.
Oh, yeah. And of course, all of that came through Disney, because they own pay-per-view. Right. So when it first came out, you had to pay Disney to watch it.
So that's the connection of Joe Rogan to Disney is through the commentary for the UFC, right?
Yeah.
Took us 90 minutes, but we got there.
It's always going to come back to Disney, and if people don't realize how nefarious that corporation is, then
one of these days we should just do a show on toy companies and toys. That would be. I mean, some people get into it and deconstruct it, but man, there's a lot of programming through toys. That we've all gone through in some level.
I would say watch The Holy Mountain.
Yeah,
it'll probably take you about 3 times to get through it, but they'd absolutely get deep into that in Holy Mountain and a lot of
what the Holy Mountain.
Jodorowsky movie.
Yeah, Jodorowsky.
So Freeman, you may be old enough to remember this. Did you ever play with an astronaut doll called Major Matt Mason? Remember that?
I'm not so sure. What comes immediately to mind is Steve Austin. I had the $6 Million Man toy.
Right.
But I don't remember Astronaut Mason.
So that was a total show and tell moment, right? So we had the space program, and this toy comes out, and his last name is Mason.
Right.
It's like, and so this is what kids were playing with. This is what I was playing with. Major Matt Mason. Yeah. So, hey, listen, we're getting to about an hour and a half here, and I just wanted to kind of bring it all together and see if there's anything else you guys, have to share or want to say, and kind of sum this whole thing up here.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have a lot, but and I think you kind of said it in some ways about drilling down and being aware of what you're taking in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's my main point in what I'm seeing in today, that, ridicule is what gets shared. Ridicule what is making it to the masses instead of the information.
Yeah.
It rules the day. We are in the era of the honey boo boo effect, which others could also call idiocracy. Mm-hmm. But I call it the honey boo boo effect because it's an era where America is made to look like a buffoon so that the rest of the world's okay with its internal demolition, and we're all falling for it, and we're acting the buffoon and continuing with the honey boo boo effect and making this all happen. The divide that is occurring now, I'm sure you would agree, none of us have ever seen anything like it. The division between people, the way Trump divided everyone, or just the idea of Trump. It wasn't Trump, it was.
Well, I think you have to get into Obama, which is, it's like the left-right combination. Obama was the socialist jab that peppered us with all the, racial, false flags and psychological operations, from Trayvon Martin to Michael Brown, to even Jonathan
Muslim
Martin.
Faith or his Christian faith.
But all that was going on. And so when Trump came into office, he was essentially entering into a realm that had already been psychologically peppered. And people were already aggravated. People were already moving further apart from one another thanks to the media or the manipulation. So now he becomes a cipher for further division. Of course, he's a Gemini, so he's going to represent duality. And no matter what the organizing principle is, make America great again, whatever, I think by the time he got there, even if Hillary had gotten in, we were already headed miles apart from one another. And I don't think she would have been a unifying force either.
Oh, God, no. I would have moved to Mexico.
Yeah.
I was legitimately thinking about it. Like if Hillary wins, I think I might move.
Yeah.
She's scary.
Diva just approved. She just stuck her head up and was like,
yeah.
Diva's like, I ain't having none of that Hillary stuff.
Get rid of Hillary.
Emily, anything you want to add to this?
No, I think, I think we just I think you're right, Freeman. It is the ridicule culture. And since we were sort of talking about, Joe and Alex, I think those podcasts of them, the two of them together, are both on some level a ridicule of them and also a ridicule of all the people listening, right? And it's I do think it's false. I think it's a staged production for both at a certain point they humiliate the people involved and also mock the audience that is listening to them, right? And that is sort of what is going on. I think you're right on about that stuff. And I think that we're in a simulation, and so whether it's in the small little space of Austin or just the world in general, right? We live in a completely aware environment, right? That is experimenting on us, but we also have the ability as creative, free-thinking human beings to play right back, right? To experiment with our environment and to feed information into that space. And so monitoring what we take in, being aware of it, and then choosing what we put out, I think is the message here, really important. And you've always been excellent with that. So thank you, Freeman.
And it's very possible that Austin, Lawrence, and these other places are these type of vortex powers. So if you are the one injecting the goodness back into that, then that's where it matters. It's like these certain areas are the really, where the battle is beginning or the catalyst of the whole situation. And care and compassion aren't in the rule book of truth, right? Like it's always hate and anger, and that was where I always came at fault in Austin, because everybody was so full of anger and hate.
Nice of a guy.
Alex with his bullhorn, and everybody wanting to take down 9/11 truth and all of that. None of it was spreading a message of compassion or starting from a place from care, and it was always in opposition. And so if we can find the way to get to the path without being in opposition of something, then we're on a trajectory.
I love that, Freeman.
Yeah. And I think this gets to your point, is that people, if they're not careful, can get really robotic in terms of their response and their reaction. And
even know why.
You really have to take a breath and pause. And I mean, even if it's so mundane sometimes, even in the response at an email or a text, sometimes there's a quality of mindfulness that you got to bring to that moment so that you're not just, sort of repeating some script. And to your point, Freeman, one of the things that I think people are really losing touch with is just basic kindness and the kindness that allows us to be human, and not some robot, not some Android, not some extension of AI. And I think that's the greatest sacrifice that we're all being sort of tested with, right? And if we can cultivate some kindness, we still have our high beams on. I think that's where we can kind of steer this thing.
Bring on the creative play.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Listen, it's been great having you both on today and joining me on the Friday FARcast. It's been a monster mash. People can see you over on Freeman TV, right, Freeman?
Absolutely. FreemanTV.com or Freeman TV YouTube.
Great. And Emily, we know where to find you.
Offplanetradio.com. Our YouTube channel is Off Planet Media. You'll be able to find this there. And we'll see you next time. I always love my Matrix Mash with Robert. It's been live the last few weeks, and look forward to the next one.
And you can find me Sunday night on the 11th house, where I get into astrology. We have a lot to talk about this Sunday. Obviously, with Mercury retrograde, Uranus and Taurus. And from Monday through Thursday, I'm at 15 Minutes of Flame on my other channel and on my website, 15 Minutes of Flame. So there you go. 3 portals to connect with all of us. And today we all connected together. Thanks a lot, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Freeman. Take it easy.
See you guys. It was good.
Cool.
And thanks everybody for attending as well. And we'll see you back here next Friday with Zeus. This is Regina's guy. We're talking about the spiritual man. That'll be a good one. All right. Take good care, everybody. See you later.
Take it easy.